Thank you, Madam Toastmaster, for introducing me today. Based on the criteria for the speech, I had to choose a topic that was a little controversial. And so I thought, should I go with politics? Should I go the route of race? Should I go the route of the gender inequality gap? And all of these are very controversial topics. And when I thought about the gender inequality gap, I figured, well, I'm not going to go that route, but I am going to go down the route of talking about money. Money tends to be one of these issues that is taboo, going along with religion and politics. And fellow Toastmasters, today I want to talk about money management and debt education, which I unfortunately think we don't have enough of before we go out into the world. I, like some of you, have student debt, and I'm still paying it back. And maybe you don't specifically have student debt, but you have a child that's in school, child that will be going to college, and so you might be in this position as well. So I have a question for a few of the audience members, if they could just take a guess. I'm going to start with you, Daisy. If you had to guess, on average, how much do you think the average student graduates with as far as debt?
I had a student debt before. I had over 100,000. Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Thank you for that answer. How about you, Alfie? If you had to guess, on average, what do you think the average student graduates with in regards to debt?
I would say it's about 120 to 150,000. If you
Gotcha.
fully fund, you have to borrow the money fully funded.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a little bit less than that, and I did some research, and according to CNBC, it's about $34,000. Again, I'm not sure specifically, but this is an average. So there are taken into account people that stay home and don't necessarily go away for school, which room and board happen to be a big factor when it comes to education. So I thought, well, what can I offer, or what can I come up with to see if we can oppose, because the speech is supposed to be opposing views, and I think education regarding debt. So I know we have a lot of topics in school, and one of them is the Pythagorean theorem. And I don't know if anybody in this room knows it off the top of their head, but it's something that is used to measure the sides of a right triangle. And honestly, I don't know when the last time was that I used it, besides, I think it was Algebra 2 in high school. Debt, however, is going to be something that we need to deal with on a constant basis throughout our lives, whether it is student debt, credit card debt, mortgage, or car loans. So I want to run through an example with you guys on something that I use. It was an app, it was on Credit Karma, and this is an example that I found, and it was kind of astonishing. So with the $5,000 credit card debt at a 15% interest rate, and let's say you're going to make a payment of $200 a month, right? Over the course of trying to pay this debt off, at $200 a month, 15% interest rate and $5,000, the total interest you will pay is over $1,000, and it'll take 31 months to pay off. This number was actually 1,033. 31 months to pay off. This is provided that we don't charge any more to the credit card, that the balance stays at $5,000, obviously as you pay the principal down, and that we don't pay any late fees. Because if you don't make a payment, well, then you got a whole other animal and you're tacking on more fees. And again, I'm not here to try to scare anybody. I'm not here to scold anybody or anything like that. I'm simply here to try to educate us and drive the point that we should know more about debt and what we can do to overcome it. Now, I did another experiment, another example, using the same numbers. So I used the same $5,000. I used the same 15% interest, but rather than a $200 payment, I increased it to a $300 payment. So maybe you need to bring in some leftovers for lunch a couple more days a week, forego the fancy smancy Starbucks latte frappe, extra skinny, upside down, whatever it happens to be every morning. And you do a coffee from the Mark Hughes Cafe or the local actually coffee. So now you've increased your payment to $300 more a month. The interest paid over at $300 a month was about $650, and it takes 19 months rather than the previous 31 months. This is a significant difference, and unfortunately I feel that we aren't really educated. Being that I was in school not that long ago, but I think it would have been very beneficial for us to have a class, at least some kind of crash course or something before you sign on to loans. Because then you can at least say, okay, I understand I'm gonna borrow X amount of dollars over a period of time. I understand what these interest rates mean. Because a lot of the times we just see it and we're just like, oh yeah, you know, like I'll sign up for the loans, I need to pay for school, whatever it happens to be. Again, this is an example of a credit card. And 15% is actually on the lower of the average side. Realistically, some people pay upwards of 20%. And so you can only imagine, this interest only increases and the time to pay it off also increases. This was an example that I used. And so I thought, well, what can we do? Should we teach it in high school? I think it should be something maybe addressed during the college application process. Again, something that a waiver, something that the parents and the student sits down with, because it's not only going to be for their student loans. It's going to be for credit cards, it's going to be for car payments, it's going to be for the mortgage further and further down the line. And I understand that we are running into a situation where we're already having a limited amount of funds that are allocated for schools and education and stuff like that. But I still think there's something that can be taken out, or something that can be done to include this into the education process. I know I've given you a little bit of a bad news. However, I do want to say that I do have some tips based on the research that I was doing, and there are certain things that can be done. First of all, based on the research, the very first priority was to set a budget for people. That way you're not spending and just swiping. Setting a budget helps, and there are plenty of apps that are out there. One of the big ones is known as Mint, M-I-N-T, and the other one is Good Budget. So you go ahead and you put in your monthly expenses, and it helps you set a budget for the month, for the quarter, for the year, etc. The next thing was paying off those debts that have higher interest rates. If you have one debt at 10% interest rate versus a debt at 6% interest rate, pay the debt off that's at the 10% interest rate first. And last, you could try it. There have been things that happen regarding it, but asking the creditors to lower the interest rate. You know, you tell them you're in good standing, you let them know you have a good credit score, whatever, you've been making your payments, and ask them, hey, is it possible to lower my interest rate into something? And there have been stories where that does happen. So here's my call to action. I don't know exactly how the education system works as far as how we can get a class or at least some kind of crash course to get this done. But I feel if we have at least a little bit of education and we can point this out as an example or even some other examples, it'll drive the point home to help so that we can have better money management skills and hopefully decrease the debt that we carry on through our lives. That's the end of my speech, and I'd now like to open it up to a brief 2 to 3 minute Q&A session. Abdu, perfect. I know you like money and you've had some speeches about money yourself. So.
David, in your
Yes.
research,
Yes.
do you know what's the percentage of the student loans that went into default?
That I did not look up as part of my research, and I think now the issue with student loans and default is that I know we have a 6-month grace period after graduating based on certain loans, but as far as them going into default, that's an increased problem here because now you're paying the late fees in addition to the interest that's adding up. So that's something I did not look up as percentage of default. Any other, Connie first and then Alfie?
One of the things they're talking about with the new tax bill that they're working on is eliminating the ability to count interest, to write off the interest on. How is that gonna affect people with student loans?
Good question.
That I'm not sure as far as how you can write it out, or how the new tax bill would affect write-offs.
Stop
I-
them?
Okay, well, that'll be another interesting thing, because now instead of being able to write off, student loans are usually at about 6% or so, depending on the loan, but on average they're about 6%, that's where mine are. But that'll be a negative, at least for me, as far as being able to write off that interest that I'm paying on a yearly basis. Alfie?
After that, none of those tax bill in a solid stone yet, so they still
Right.
in the air, so.
Yeah,
Still
there's
some
some,
hope.
But it's something that in mind. One other question I have is, have you ever come across, you got in the mail saying, if you transfer your credit card interest to my card and you get 1 year free interest, this and that, would that work that way? If you keep switching card from one to the other, pay off transfer, that
Right.
means you're always getting a lot less interest payment.
right, so that's one thing, but you need to also look into an amortization schedule, and also look into opening different lines of credit and how that affects your credit score. Because with an amortization schedule, you're usually paying, if you have a $2,000 payment, usually most of that payment for the first payments up to a certain point are mostly interest and very little principal. Once you get to the end of that schedule, it's mostly principal and very little interest. So if you've already paid mostly interest, sometimes it just makes more sense. Again, every case is different, but sometimes it makes more sense to just finish paying it, because once you transfer to the new one, obviously there's a grace period of 0%, but then you're gonna have that new interest rate, and now again, you're paying mostly interest and very little principal towards your debt. So, but again, every case is a little bit different, and a lot of the cases too, when I was doing research, is they would say to get specific answers for every case is to talk to either a financial planner or a debt consultant. That ends my brief Q&A, but I appreciate everybody being here today, and I'll pass it back to our Toastmaster.